Hello and welcome back to the MongoDB live stream. So I'm Nick and I'm with Otto, and we're going to be doing some Next.js development. But I want to go over some logistic stuff before we get into the stream. So this is the start of a new year. This is our first stream of the year. And to go with that, we're not only streaming on Twitch right now, but we are in parallel streaming to YouTube. So if you prefer to watch on YouTube, just go to the official MongoDB YouTube channel. Go ahead and subscribe. You'll get notifications every time we go live. Likewise with the Twitch channel. We are live, so please engage with us in the chat. If you have a question for Otto or myself, drop us a question. We'll answer it on the stream. If there's any kind of audio or video issues as well, let us know about it so that way we can see if we can correct it. Otto, did I miss anything?
No. Welcome, everybody. This is our first time streaming to both platforms like Nick said. So if we do run into any technical issues, please bear with us. And we are very excited, and we have a lot of great content for you. Before we get started talking about Next.js, MongoDB, and all that good stuff, do we also want to mention the upcoming AMA, Nick? With
yeah, absolutely. You want to shed some light on that, and I'll get the link for us?
Sure, absolutely. So in about an hour, our CTO at MongoDB, Mark Porter, will be doing an AMA on Reddit, and it's on the official IMA subreddit. Check it out there. Ask Mark any questions. He is a lovely guy, loves engaging with the community, loves talking to developers, is a developer himself. And yeah, come hang out with Mark, join us, and try to stump him.
Yes, please. He's a sharp guy though, so it might be difficult.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
So what do we do today, Otto?
So today I thought we would kick the year off by talking a little bit about Next.js and seeing how you can integrate Next.js into, or seeing how you can integrate MongoDB into your Next.js application to have an amazing developer experience. And I don't know about you, Nick, but I've spent a lot of time over the last year really playing around with Next.js, learning that it's become like my go-to framework for developing applications. And pairing it with MongoDB is such a natural extension of the framework that it makes development really fun. Have you worked with Next.js before?
I have not. I've never even looked at it prior to you being at MongoDB. So I think you've done one other stream in the past, but I don't know. I find it hard to keep up with all these new frameworks. There's a lot coming out, right?
There is a lot. I mean, the front end landscape is constantly changing, constantly evolving. And the thing that I really like about Next is that it's just a framework built around React. So if you know React, jumping into Next.js is, you'll feel right at home. A lot of the concepts are taken directly from React. And the benefit of Next.js is that it adds all of the missing functionality that you wish React had, like server-side rendering, like image optimization, internalization, analytics, like a lot of the server-side stuff that you don't get with just React, you get it with Next. And that's one of the reasons that I'm a huge fan.
Awesome. Let's should I share your screen? You want to dig into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome.
So, here I am on the Next.js homepage. I just kind of wanted to show it off a little bit, talk a bit more about the framework. They kind of bill it as the React framework for production. And, if we look at the why Next.js, there's a whole lot of features that you can kind of see here. And, some of the ones that I'm really hyped on, really bullish on is their hybrid approach. So have you worked with Gatsby before? Nick?
Very loosely, but I am more familiar with what's happening in the Gatsby space than the Next.js space.
Got it. Yeah. So Next.js. So like Gatsby is built as like a static site generator, like a JavaScript based static site generator, and they have a crap ton of plugins to make it really really easy to build static websites and get your data from all sorts of different different places. And Next.js has a lot of those features and functionalities. And they also have this hybrid approach where you can statically generate certain pages and then server-side render others. And then yet, the third type is just traditional, spa-based pages that render in the browser.
We have a question coming in the chat.
Sure.
And this is something you might be up your alley here. Is it correct that React Router DOM isn't needed with Next.js because it has routing built in via pages?
Correct. Yeah. So with Next.js, you don't have to worry about routing. They use basically a directory-based routing system, and I'll show you how that works when we get into the code portion of it. But simply you just create a new page, and Next.js is smart enough to figure out how this page should be rendered, what the link should be for it, and it does everything for you.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about static side generation, server side rendering. Incremental static regeneration is another really, really unique feature that allows you to pre-render your content. So, let's say you have data in a MongoDB database, and you don't want, and it's fairly static data, like a blog post that isn't updated every few seconds or even hours. With incremental static generation, what you can do is pre-render that data from MongoDB when your application is built, and then every so often, let's say every hour or every day, you can go back into MongoDB, get the updated data if there is any, and regenerate that static page. So your users get a really fast experience. The page loads super fast. You're not putting load on your database, but you still get the new data as it's updated without having to rebuild like you would have to in some other frameworks. And then there's a whole lot we can talk about: API routing, fast refresh, et cetera, and we'll kind of get into that when we start coding. And awesome. I think I see another question before we jump in. How do I use Next.js with my Golang website? So great question. So Next.js is a JavaScript and Node-based framework. So it wouldn't necessarily you couldn't use it with Go. Oh, let's see. That's not true. Like there's.
Would you want to use it with Go? Is maybe the better question.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nick. I don't think you would want to mix the two because Next.js comes with its own server. It uses Express under the hood. So I suppose you could kind of jerry-rig it to make it fit, but you don't need Go to have a Next website, if that makes sense. Cool. So I hope that answered your question. But if you'd like to add a follow-up, please do, and we'll talk about it.
Yep.
So so let's get into some code. So I'll open up my Visual Studio Code here, and let's just create a Next.js application that uses MongoDB. And we'll talk a little bit more about MongoDB and how that's going to work in just a little bit. But to get started with creating a Next.js website, and we're going to do this exactly from scratch. So if you want to follow along, feel free. But creating a Next.js website is as simple as running npx create next app. And then
give it a title.
You do have to give it a title, but I'm also going to pass one parameter into it called example. And the example that I'm going to pass is called with MongoDB. And then we're going to name our website, what our application is going to be called. And in this case, we're going to use a data set that MongoDB provides to their users of the Atlas platform called sample Airbnb. So our application is going to be called NextBnB. So we have our npx command. We have our create next app that's going to create our application. We're passing in this example with MongoDB, and then we're naming our website or our application NextBnB. So I'll hit enter and let that run.
So it's with MongoDB a template?
It is a template, and it looks like I already have that one. So let's do this. I'll go up one directory and we'll rerun it.
Did we use Yarn on this? We got a comment saying to use a specific flag to use npm. Does Next.js use Yarn by default?
That I don't know. It might. I don't have Yarn installed locally, so if it does, it's like
All
a
right.
wrapper around it. But you know, I've never really been a big fan of Yarn. Like I've always stuck to npm as my go-to.
Got a lot better since Yarn was released. I mean, npm did. Know that there
Yeah,
was problems
definitely.
back in the day.
Yeah, I remember running an npm install took ages. But anyway, so we have our application, and you kind of brought up a good point about that example with MongoDB and that being a template. And you know, you are spot on with that. And to show you how that works, let's cd into this NextDB directory. And actually, let me open up the project here. So what happened when we ran it with MongoDB example? All it did was add one additional page or one additional file in our application, which was this MongoDB JavaScript file. And what this file contains is our connection strings to MongoDB, so that we can connect to MongoDB whether it's installed locally or if we're using MongoDB Atlas. It gives us all of the kind of glue between MongoDB and our Next.js application. So, you know, here we see we're going to be using the MongoDB Node.js driver. So we're importing Mongo client from it. We have some error handling. And then
what's it doing with, I mean, this is, I've never seen this before. Up at the top, I saw that we were doing a process. I thought we were importing it. Never mind. Sorry, on line 3, I didn't see the constant. I thought we were importing it. So I assume that we're just matching up the variable names then, right? Or
yep. Yeah. So we're just going to pull in our MongoDB URI and the database we want to work with from our environment variable, which we'll set up in a minute.
Sure.
Then we have a bit of error handling if we start the application and we haven't provided a URI or a DB. And then what we're also going to do is we are going to cache our Mongo connections. So once we've established a connection to MongoDB, rather than reconnecting every single time and creating a bunch of pooling, we're going to cache that connection and reuse it across our application.
Awesome.
And then from there, you know, we are just connecting to MongoDB. So we have this connected database function, which is either going to get our cached connection, or if we don't have a cached connection, we're going to go and connect to MongoDB, get our database, and go from there. And the final thing we need to do to get set up here is open up this env.local file. We can delete the example because we actually want this env local to load. And then we have to provide it our MongoDB URI and our MongoDB database that we want to work with. And where we're going to get these from are MongoDB Atlas. And if you guys are not familiar with MongoDB Atlas, it's MongoDB's database as a service cloud platform that allows you, that is, you know, fully managed MongoDB in the cloud across any, you know, cloud provider, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure. And we recently released a multi-cloud feature so that you can have your nodes, your performance, everything across the 3 big cloud providers. And you know, wherever you are in the world, you know, we said since you know MongoDB Atlas is powered by AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure, there's going to be a region for you that is centrally located. While I log in, do you want to say anything else on Atlas, Nick?
No, I think that sums it up. I mean, we're going to see more of a walkthrough, and we've gone over Atlas plenty of times as far as setting it up on other streams on the channel, all of which can be found on demand on YouTube. So if you're tuning in from Twitch right now, just head over to the YouTube channel. We have a Twitch playlist, and you can catch up on a lot of on-demand streams that we've done together.
Definitely. And you know, the thing I love most about MongoDB Atlas is I don't have to worry about any of the setup stuff, managing my database. I just log in, I have the UI, you know, set up my cluster, connect to it, and go from there. So So I've just logged in, and I kind of wanted to do step by step so that people following along could also follow along rather than
Awesome.
have to stop and reload. So if you are following along and you just set up your MongoDB Atlas cluster to get the sample data set, to get the sample data, you just hit these three little dots here, and you hit the load sample data set button, load sample data set, and it's going to give you a 7 or 8 different data sets that you can work with. So if you're just new to MongoDB, just want to play around with it, and you want some data to play around with just to see what the capabilities are, you have that available for you. And MongoDB Atlas, I am running an M10 cluster at the moment, but we have a free tier that it's free forever, and you'll have all of these features available in the free tier as well.
Sweet. Otto, you want to take a step back for a second? We have a question coming in. I think it might be worth brushing over since we've had a lot of new people join the stream.
Sure.
Can we give just a quick overview on why we don't need React.js for NextJS? Or
Sure.
why would we want to use it over React.js?
Yeah, absolutely. So, React.js is a SPA framework, right? A React-based application is going to run entirely in the browser, so you lose a lot of server-side functionality. You can't do like if you're building a blog or a website that relies on SEO, doing it with plainly just React, you'll have to go through a whole bunch of additional steps to pre-render that data to prepare it for search engines. With Next.js, you have that entire kind of backing to do server-side rendering, to managing your routing, managing all sorts of features that React doesn't provide. Next.js provides on top of React. And I hope that answers that. I really just see Next.js as an extension of React. So if you're already familiar with React and you want to build a really big scalable application and you want to do some server-side stuff with it as well, without having to do a whole lot of setup, I think Next.js is a great option.
We've had a few questions come in on this already. Are we going to be using Mongoose for this example, or are we going to be using the vanilla SDK?
So we're going to be using the vanilla SDK, the Node.js driver, but you can absolutely use Mongoose with Next.js as well. And it is, I think there's already an example Next.js template as well with Mongoose. So if you didn't want to use the MongoDB Node.js driver, you could use Mongoose. But Andrew mentioned that the Node.js driver makes doing queries painless, and I think it really does. So,
yep.
It's really up to you. I personally prefer the Node driver just because it kind of doesn't it doesn't hide anything from you. That doesn't do any sort of magic. It's just here's the API. Here's what you can do with it, and go for it. Cool. So let's connect to our MongoDB database. And to connect to it from our Next.js application, all I'll do is hit this connect button, hit the connect to your application, and I'm going to copy this connection string. So hit copy here.
See how bad your passwords are now?
Well, my password is MongoDB, but the other good thing about MongoDB Atlas is when it comes to accessing your cluster, we have this network access tab, and I am only allowing connections from my current IP address. So, even if you do have my username and password as well as my connection string, you're not going to be able to connect to that cluster. And so that's why I feel okay sharing the connection string because I know nobody it's going to be essentially useless for anybody. Cool. So let's go ahead and connect to it. So we have our URI, and I'll have to change a few things here. So MongoDB, and the password is MongoDB, and then the database that we're going to connect to is called. We'll go into our collections here and take a look at the data we have. We are going to connect to this sample_Airbnb database, which is
Sweet.
going
Can
to
you zoom in just like maybe 1 or 2 times?
1, 2.
Yeah, that works.
How does that look? Better?
That looks good to me. Yeah.
Awesome.
Not small all of a sudden.
Yeah, I bet. So I have all of these other databases that I could connect to as well, but the one we're going to work with is called sample_Airbnb, and this database has one collection called listings and reviews. And if you're coming from the SQL world, database name is equivalent to a database, and a collection can loosely be equivalent to a table. The big difference being that in MongoDB, within a collection, we hold documents which can be, complex JSON types. In the database, they're stored as BSON, binary JSON. But when we actually process and work with them, they are represented in JSON. So we can have things like arrays, like complex JavaScript objects, nested arrays with objects in them. For example, like this reviews is an array that has a bunch of complicated objects. And this is all within one document, so we can very easily query all of this data. Cool. So let's go ahead and connect to our sample_Airbnb database. We'll go into our application here, paste it, hit save. And now we're ready to start our application and make sure that everything is working so far. And to do this, I'm just going to run npm run dev. That's going to take about a second to build and load, and it looks like we are ready to start on localhost 3000.
We have a plug for one of your blog articles.
Oh, awesome.
That is good for the Mongoose versus the vanilla Node.js driver.
Oh,
so
I love that.
Link.
Well, thank you, Nick. Yeah, I actually...
Well, it wasn't me that was plugging it. It was one of the members in the chat. So
right on.
Our bot blocked them, so I cut it up.
Yeah, I just remembered that I did write an article last year, probably early last year, talking about the differences between Mongoose and just using the Node.js driver directly. And yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against Mongoose. I've used it in the past for many, many projects. The one thing that I will say that kind of limits me personally, and this is personal opinion. When it comes to Mongoose, you have to define your schema in your Node application, and the big benefit of MongoDB is that it is a schemaless database. So you're kind of putting these artificial barriers to your schema in your in your application. And MongoDB does support schema validation and schema enforcement on the database side. So if you did want to have a strictly enforced schema, you could absolutely do that without Mongoose. And I'm always thinking about in the future, what if I want to move my app from Node to Go or to a different language? Then Mongoose is kind of a bottleneck as opposed to just using the built-in drivers.
And if you wanted a JavaScript-based validation as well, you could also use Joy to get the job done. That's another popular one.
Yeah, so now we are connected to our MongoDB database. And if you worked with Next.js before and you did the starter, by default, it says, welcome to Next.js. Since we are using with MongoDB template, it says, welcome to Next.js with MongoDB. And at this point, the only thing I really care about is seeing this you're connected to MongoDB message. And this tells us that our connection string was accepted, it was valid, and we are able to establish a connection. So now we can work with our data. And so the next thing I want to do is start working with our data a little bit. So let's go back into our application here.
And this is all basically boilerplate right now. We just plugged in the connection information, right? All
we did was plug in our MongoDB URI and our database that we wanted to connect to.
Sweet.
So to get started, the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about routing. And somebody had mentioned in the comment that with Next.js you don't need React Router DOM because all of the routing in Next.js is done in this file-based routing system. So right now we have this index homepage. And if we wanted to create a new page, all we have to do is create a new file in this special pages directory. So let's say we wanted to create a page called contact.js, and I'm just going to copy all of the code here, save it, and our application is going to automatically rebuild. And if we go to /contact, now we have that route, and we don't have to set anything. We don't have to define that route. We don't have to say how it should work. All we did was just create that page, add the React component for it, and it works just fine. But Next.js also has another special directory that we can work with called API that would live under the pages directory. So we'll create it here, API, and we'll call it, let's say properties.js. And what the API directory does is any file that we create in here is going to actually create an express API for us. So now we can just create a function like, let's say, async function, and have it be handler that takes a request and response. And let's just send a response saying, hello world. So we just created an API endpoint that's going to run on the backend. So this API, this code, will never be available to the front end. So we can have, exposed secrets. We can have client data or private server data, all within these functions. And it's essentially an Express.js, like a handler function, if you will. And to show you how that.
A quick question coming in from Harris before we get too far ahead of ourselves here. I know this is a little bit of a pivot,
sure.
But can we use Next.js on Realm's hosting? I want to say no because it's static, right? This is not static?
So
maybe I'm wrong.
So if you build your Next.js application and you are using it as just a static generator, then you can. You would just upload your Next.js build file. But if you are using the API functionality that I'm talking about right now, then in that case, you wouldn't be able to host it on Realm at the moment. Maybe in the future.
Got it.
So we have this properties API. To access that, all we do is append API, and then properties was the route that we created. By executing that, we get our hello world message, in JSON format. And then I do see another question. Is the API directory needed if we're offloading endpoints to AWS Lambda or Google Cloud Functions? No, it is not. So the really cool thing that I think the Next.js team did was add this additional API functionality if you wanted everything within your Next.js app. And what they do is, if you're using Vercel, which is the company behind Next.js, if you're using their hosting platform to deploy your application, when you go and say, here's my Next.js app, deploy it to Vercel, what they're going to do is look at any of the routes in your API directory and automatically create serverless functions for them, break them out, and manage all of that for you. But if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to have your own backend, your own API that your Next.js app talks to, then you can absolutely omit this API directory. I hope that answers your question. But so the next thing I wanted to show you is how we can actually use that MongoDB connection. So we'll use it here in our properties API route for now, and then we'll move it into our front end. So the first thing we'll need to do is we're going to need to import our connect to database function, which is going to allow us to get that database connection. So we'll say import connect to database. And that's going to be coming from MongoDB. So this is going to allow us to get the database connection that we have already established when we build the application and get that cached kind of pooled version. Otherwise, we're going to create a new connection and get the live one. And then from here, what we're going to do is get the database that we want to work with from the connect to database.
Wait, can you open up your mongodb.js file again? I mean, what is maybe I missed it. Where is this connect to database function coming from?
Yeah. So that one
there it
lives
is.
at the top level. So we're exporting this function, and what happens when you run this function is we're either going to return the cache connection that's already established, or we're going to create a new connection to MongoDB, MongoDB Atlas or your MongoDB connection, and then send you both the client and the database. And in my case here, I'm just destructuring that return and just getting the database because we don't need the client.
And this wouldn't be too it doesn't look like it'd be too difficult to modify in the event that you needed multiple databases, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanted to have, database 1, database 2, et cetera, you could absolutely do that. And
got it.
And the other thing is too, like I also give you the client. So you could in here, if you get the client, you could say, database is client db, blah, 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 and connect it, like kind of ad hoc if you needed a specific database. But for our example, we're just going to be working off of one database that we defined in our environment variable. So from here, once we have our database, and we're using this async await function, so once we connect to our database, we can execute MongoDB MQL queries to get data, insert data, delete data, work with our data. And just to show you how that works, let's go ahead and get some data from our MongoDB database. So I'll say const data equals database db.collection, and the collection is the collection that we want to work with. And in our case, that collection was listings and reviews. So we'll say listings and reviews. And then we'll say find. And we're not going to pass in any parameters for our find. So this is just going to give us the first, however many records we want. And if we just pass in this find operation without any sort of limits, we're going to get back all 5,000 plus documents, which we probably don't want. So we'll also add a limit. And our limit is going to be, let's say, the first 20 documents. And then the final thing we'll do here is called the toArray method, which is going to take, so if we were to just call find and pass in a limit, it's going to give us back a cursor, not the data. So calling this toArray method is going to actually get us the JSON documents that we want to work with. And then just to make sure that this works, let's just respond with that data. So this looks good, right? I'm hoping this looks good. So we'll hit save. Let's go back to our application and see if we can get some of this live data displayed in our NextJS application, and for now in our API. All right, the joys of live coding. So we didn't get anything back, and the reason for that is,
take a picture of this for Twitter.
Let's see. So let's make sure that we have the collection name correct. Listings and reviews. Actually, let's also console log data here just to see if we get. Oh, I know what happened. We should await, because this also returns a promise.
It looks like somebody spotted it at the same time as you.
Oh, nice. There we go. So let's try it again. Refresh. Boom. So now we have an array of data that has, different properties, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to be in the same order. We're not doing any sort of ordering or limiting, but actually looks like it might be. So charming duplex, and we have all of the data, all of the information that we could ever want on all of these properties. So we're able to get data from our collection, and we have this properties API. But say we wanted to work with this data in our NextJS application, in our components, in our actual pages. So let's go back to our index page here, and I'm going to delete kind of the boilerplate that comes with it, and we're just going to start from scratch. Let's say div, and from here, what we could do is, let's see, we could, if we were building just a traditional React application, we could, when our application is loaded, do a fetch call and, talk to our API endpoint, get that data, and display it in the component. But Next.js allows us to do this a better way, I think, and that is by using this additional method called getServerSideProps. And what this is going to do is allow us to get our props data, get our data on the server side, and then send it to our React component. And I already have the connected database imported here, so the await, so we're connected to our database here. We're going to swap out the client for the database, and then we're not running this is connected anymore, so we don't need this. But what we are going to do is actually, and again, here, if we wanted to remove this and have our call for data be this properties API endpoint, we could do that. But with Next.js, we can actually talk to our database directly in this getServerSideProps method. And this getServerSideProps method also is never going to be sent to the browser. So our users, when they see our Next.js application, they'll see whatever's in this return, whatever we put in the React component, that's going to be delivered client side, browser side. But our getServerSideProps method is only going to execute server side.
Is that a reserved function? Is that why, or is it
because
we set it up that way?
Yep, that is a reserved function in the Next.js framework. And I also see a question asking why not TypeScript. You can absolutely use TypeScript with Next.js, and I think I have a YouTube video on how to set that up. And the Next.js team does provide types for all of the Next.js components, its entire API. So using it with TypeScript is very, very easy. But here we can actually just go in our properties array, get our data, run it the exact same way, and pass it here. Let's say, properties data. Now, we will run into an issue when we do this. So, by default, and also if we, console log the data, we'll see that we do get the data back. But when we go into our application, we're going to run into a little snag. And just to show you how that works and what that snag is, I'll go to localhost 3000, and I'll get this server error saying error serializing properties, return from server-side props. And the reason for this is when we use getServerSideProps, we can only pass it a plain JavaScript object. And when we get data from MongoDB, it's going to be complex data types. It's going to have, if we look at it, we're going to have object IDs, we're going to have doubles, floats, all sorts of different, complex data types that the getServerSideProps method at this time isn't able to serialize. It only wants a plain JavaScript object with, properties and either, strings, numbers, and arrays, objects, et cetera, et cetera. So what we have to do is, and this is kind of a crappy solution. I have not been able to find a more eloquent solution for this yet. But to get around it, what I do is, let's just say const properties is to stringify the data we get back and then reparse it. So JSON parse, stringify, and then parse, and then send that properties data to the browser. And then let's say properties here. Now, if we go back into our code, refresh, We're not going to get anything back because we don't have anything. Right? It's an empty component. And this prop we can remove with properties. Now let us console log it in the browser to see if we do in fact get this data.
We're getting a lot of love for Mongoose today.
Nice. Yeah, I love Mongoose. I mean, it's a great framework, especially if you're just starting out with MongoDB and you're coming from a SQL system where you really had to think about types a lot. Having a well-defined schema. I think Mongoose is a kind of great segue into learning about NoSQL and MongoDB, and then once you've had some experience with it, maybe try the node driver. Yeah, so let's go into our browser here, refresh, and again, we're not expecting to see anything, but if we look at our console log, we should see that array of 20 properties, and we do. So we have all of our information, our review scores, security deposit, and you can see here once we did that JSON parse and JSON stringify for doubles, or numbers with decimals, instead of just giving us the actual amount, it did this numbers decimal, which we could then I suppose cast to a number and convert it. But that's kind of the only workaround that I've found, and I've talked a lot with other people in the community, and hopefully this gets addressed sooner rather than later. But for now, that's what we have to work with. Cool. So the next thing I wanted to focus on was we have our data. So we're able to get data from our MongoDB database. Let's see how let's actually display that data. So I will import a package into my application here. And so I'm just copying and pasting some code. Here, we're using the head component, which comes with Next.js. And this head component is going to allow us to work with the head of the HTML document. So we can set the title, we can import additional JavaScript, or in this case, I'm just importing a style sheet, Tailwind CSS, so that we can have a nice style and kind of nice UI for our application. And rather than spending the next 15-20 minutes writing up a bunch of style classes and building out the UI, I also have a little bit of code kind of prepared. So I'm just going to copy and paste that, and then we will walk through it. So this is what the code looks like, and I will talk it through. So we are getting a prop passed into our application. We're destructuring it here, called properties, which is going to have the 20 properties that we get from our MongoDB Atlas database. And then, so that properties is going to be an array. So we're going to map over that. We're going to say properties and properties.map, get our property, and then display its image, name, the number of guests it can take, its address, summary, as well as how much it costs per night to book. And we can get rid of the cleaning fee. We're not going to cover that. And then this details will change to book. And let's just make it a button. Button, and we'll get rid of the link. So all I did here was just add a bunch of Tailwind CSS classes to give us a prettier UI. And let's go back into our code and see if everything still works.
Hey, since we have a lot of new people joining the stream, because this is
Sure.
a good stream so far, I know that we've done this already, but it might be worth just showing just one more time. We have a question regarding how to add multiple MongoDB databases to your application. Do you just want to head
Sure.
over to the mongodb.js file?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to add multiple MongoDB databases, you would go into the util MongoDB file. And then in here, I'm just creating one database. So one DB that goes into the database and uses the MongoDB database environment variable that I set. But if you wanted to connect to multiple databases, let's say, backup database, you could just do client DB and then whatever the name of the database is. If you had yet another one you wanted to connect to, it would just be, third database, client DB, and then whatever that database name is. So then when you wanted to, talk to the collections within these databases, you would import them.
And you probably wouldn't hard code them in that file anyways. You'd add them to the env file alongside the other properties.
Exactly. Yeah, so you could add them in here, or if you wanted to hard code them, just, for example's sake, you could do it in here. Then you would just import them, their database, and then you could run the execute it that way.
Yeah, thanks for revisiting this.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll just remove this so we don't get confused. So we did get a number of errors saying objects are not valid as React child. Collection of children use an array. And I think the reason for that is...
Wait, what's the error again?
So objects are not valid as React child and object with keys number decimal. Okay, got it. So the reason that we're running into this issue is we are sending back a lot of this data from our MongoDB Atlas cluster. And, if you look at each document, we have a whole lot of data on all of them. And we get this data back. And then when we do that JSON stringify and parse, it converts these objects into kind of not really valid JSON. So what we can do is map over this properties array. So what we're going to do is, let's say, const filtered equals properties.map. So we're going to go over the data that we get back, and we're going to format it to a format that Next.js is going to like, and it's going to make it much easier for us to work with the data as well, because we're not going to be passing to the front end all of the data that we might not be using. And to do this, we'll say a property and then execute some code. And I actually have a little return here. It should help us. And the other thing I'll need to do.
And you're just picking out the fields that you want then, in this case, right?
Yep, I am just picking out the fields I want. And again, for this price, the reason that React didn't like it is because of this $, number decimal. So we're just going to take care of that in the get server side props method, clean up the data, and then send it to the front end. And the other thing too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna ask. So since we're filtering for only the fields that we want here in our application code, why don't we just do a projection inside of the query itself?
Yep. So we could do that, and I was just going to mention that if we.
Oh, sorry.
No, all good. If we wanted to, when we run this DB collection find, we're not passing in any parameters, and we're just saying get us the first 20 documents that you find. It's going to send us back the entire document, and if we don't care about the interaction or the access or, specific fields, we're still going to be getting them, and then we're kind of discarding them in our Next.js, in the get server side props method. But if we just wanted to get certain data back, if we only cared about, like the ID, the name, the image, we could add a project stage and say, I only want the ID 1, I only want the property image 1, et cetera, et cetera.
Don't forget your, there you go.
So what this is, and I always forget word wrap. So what the project stage would do is when we set the request to MongoDB, to MongoDB Atlas, this project is going to say, just get us back the specific fields that we ask for. So we're going to be sending less data back to our browser, less data to process. But I'm not going to use this project stage in this case, just because I'm not sure what all of the data we need. And we're also running a little short on time. So just to kind of speed things up a little bit, I'll omit the project stage and we'll get all the data
I have
back.
as much time as you got, man. I can stay here as long as you want.
Well, how about our viewers?
We've got a lot of viewers that are really interested over here.
Right on.
But yeah, maybe some people in the chat say if you want us to keep going or
yeah, let us know. So let's see if this fixes our issues. So we'll go back, refresh our page, and we're getting cleaning fee, and that's because we're not using the cleaning fee anymore. We'll get rid of that. Refresh, boom. Nice. So now we have a user interface. We have 20 properties from our MongoDB database that are, we get their name that matches up to the name of the property. We get a quick summary where it's located, the cost per night, and then we have this button to book the property. And all of that works really, really well. And if we wanted to get more documents back, we could just update the limit. So let's say instead of 20 properties, we want to display 50 of them. We'll say 50 properties, refresh here, and give it a second. And now we have a lot more properties to look at. And, I can see how you might, if you wanted to do kind of endless scrolling, when you scroll to the bottom, make a request from your React front end to go and fetch the additional data as well. But, we'll save that for another discussion. But so far, all we did was execute one simple query, format our data a little bit, and now we're talking to MongoDB, we're getting data into our application. Kind of the last thing I wanted to show was how we can write data to our MongoDB Atlas database. And to do this, what we're going to do is add a onClick function to this book. So we'll say when a user clicks the book button, we are going to execute a function called book, and we're going to pass in that property so we know which property the user is booking. So we'll also need to add a function here called constBook. We'll make it an arrow function, get the property that the user is booking. And this is where things get a little interesting or a little complicated, because we do have this connect to database method. And you would imagine, or I could see how you might think that, why don't I just do the same thing here, get my database and connect to it and execute the insert operation there. And the reason that this isn't going to work is this connected database only works on the server side. It's never exposed to the client. So to be secure and to be safe, this isn't going to work. And if we were to try to do it, we'll get an error. Especially because the Node driver relies on a DNS and a bunch of the other Node packages that aren't available to the browser APIs. So this wouldn't work. But what we can do is add an API route, add an additional API route, and we'll call it book.js. And with this book.js function, what we're going to do there is essentially connect to our database. So we'll say,
and I did remember that we actually do have a finite cutoff time for this stream because of the AMA coming up.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so we can't go long.
We won't go too long over.
Yeah.
We'll connect to our database. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to run that insert operation. So we'll say database.get or database.collection. And now, I don't think it makes sense to add our data to the listings and reviews collection. So we can add a new collection, and we'll just say bookings, and we'll run an insert one. And our data is going to be the data that we get from here, from our index page, from the book. So let's remove this. And we'll, just to make things simpler, we'll just send a GET request with the data that we want to insert. So we'll say const data equals request.query. And we're not going to do any sort of validation. Whatever we get in the query, we're just going to throw into our database. Very dangerous. Living on the edge.
We do have a question that I didn't want to forget about. It's not totally related to this topic, but
sure.
It's in regards to your environment file. We maybe need some clarity on what happens for deployment.
Sure. Yeah. So if you are deploying to Vercel, which is the kind of the Next.js preferred platform, they will take your env.local, but you can also create an env.staging, env.production environment variable, or you can just pass in the environment variables in your build. Like in the terminal, when you start up the server, you can pass in environment variables there. So the platform, and actually, if you are using, this is a really cool thing that I really like about Vercel, is if you go to their repo, Next.js GitHub, and you go to their examples, and we'll just pick with MongoDB. And we do have with MongoDB mongoose as well, but I'll just do the with MongoDB one. You can actually hit deploy, one-click deploy, sign in. I'll sign in with GitHub. Oh boy.
Uh-oh, you gonna expose yourself right now? I wouldn't worry about it. Just skip.
Yeah. So you can actually just go through this, log in, and it's going to ask you ask you to import the environment variables that you want, and all of that is going to work, seamlessly. So they'll do all the setup for you. Anyway, just because we do have a few minutes left, let's wrap this guy up. So we are inserting our data. Let's also capture that response, and this also returns a promise. So we're going to wait, and then we'll say send us back that response. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to run the fetch to our API. As an API book, and actually let's make it with string literals so that we can pass in the, let's say the ID of the property, which is going to be property underscore ID, and the booker, the person that booked it. So let's just say guest, and here we'll just say auto. And yeah, we'll say const data fetch, and then we'll say console log data. We'll make this an async function as well, await, and then we can display that response. So now what we have is we built another API endpoint that's going to allow us to insert data into our MongoDB Atlas collection. It's going to be in a new collection called bookings, and we're just inserting whatever we get passed in as query parameters. And our query parameters are going to be the property ID, which is going to be the property ID from the address, and who the guest is. And we're just going to hard code that the guest is myself. And then we're just going to console log the response that we get back from MongoDB Atlas. I'm going to hit save. We'll go back into our application. Let's refresh, just make sure everything is clear there. I'll open up my console, clear these errors, and let's try to book a property. This Deluxe Loft Suite looks really good. So let's hit book, fingers crossed. And we get a promise back, which is fine.
Did we not include an await in there?
I think we did not.
We did. Await fetch.
Const response equals await, because this is also a
oh, all right.
And then we'll console log this guy. So we'll redo this, and this error, this is just a React saying that each of these should have a unique key. Okay. So it's more of a warning than an error. And then I'm using class instead of class name because I'm a terrible programmer. But let's try to book this Deluxe Loft Suite again. We'll hit book, and the result we get back is from MongoDB telling us that we inserted one document into our collection, that one document was successfully inserted. And if we look at the ops, what actually happened, we inserted a document with the guest field of auto, the property ID of 1005, which is the ID for this property, and then a unique object ID for that booking. And if we go into our MongoDB kind of backend, our Atlas dashboard, let's refresh this. And now we have a bookings collection created, as well as the 2 times that I booked that property. So we have the property ID, my name, auto, and et cetera, et cetera. So, awesome. So that works. And, in a real world application, you probably wouldn't want to send back your MongoDB, all of this information. This is more for your server to acknowledge. So, you might do something like, if the response OK was 1, then, send back a message saying, OK, inserted. But you probably wouldn't want to send this to the client. You
probably want your booking ID. Maybe the inserted ID could represent your booking ID, or?
Yep, or something like that. So that's how you insert data. And the only other thing that I really wanted to show off that I think would be cool, that I think we can do in 3 minutes, is to add search functionality to our application using MongoDB Atlas search. Let's see how quickly we can add really complex search capabilities to our application. To do it, we'll go into MongoDB Atlas, into our listings and reviews collection. We'll create a search index. And what this is going to do is it's going to prepare our data set to run MongoDB Atlas search. So we'll hit create a search index. It looks like they added this visual editor. This is
I don't remember that. This just happened.
Yeah, index default. This is pretty unique. And we'll just create a standard Lucene search index. And this is going to take about a minute or 2 to build. So while it does that, let's create an API endpoint for our search. We'll say search.js. And to get started, I'm just going to copy the properties array just to get the connected database and the collection. And what we're going to do here is, instead of running a find operation, we're going to run an aggregation expression. And my boss, or our boss, Joe Drumgoole, calls the MongoDB aggregation framework kind of MongoDB's superpower. And you'll see why in just a second. So aggregations, they allow you to run really complex queries on your data type. And there's all sorts of different operators for allowing you to manage how you want to display and show and work with your data. And in our case, we're going to build a simple pipeline that is going to run the search operator and give us back really good search results. So aggregations are, represent pipelines in a stage. And our first stage in this pipeline is going to be to run our search. So we're going to run the search operator. And the search operator takes in a search what our query is going to be. And here we have the query that we
What are
want
we
to
going to
pass
search for?
in.
Are we going to search for bookings, or are we going to search for listings? Oh, listings and reviews. All right, I see it now.
We're using the listings and reviews collection, and we're going to search. We're going to allow the user to search for whatever they want, and that's going to be through the request, query, and maybe the search term. And then the second property that we can pass in here is the path. And what the path represents is what fields we want to search on. So, if we wanted to just search by, say, for example, if we only wanted the user to search by the summary or the name, you could just, say name or summary. Or if we wanted the search to work across multiple fields in a document, we just pass in an array. So an array of paths or fields that we want the user to be able to search for. So let's just say, we want the user to be able to search in the description and maybe the amenities array.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we're specifying specific paths in our search aggregation stage, it may be worthwhile to create an index that's only indexing those two paths, correct?
Yep. So by default, we just created a kind of default cookie cutter dynamic search index, which is going to index basically the entire document. It's going to try to figure it out on its own. But if we wanted to really fine tune this and really take control, we could specify the specific fields that we wanted to search on. So we have that stage in our pipeline. The other thing we're going to do is we're just going to create one additional stage called limit, just to get back a certain number of results. And let's just say we want to get back the first 20. And with that, our aggregation pipeline and our search functionality is built in and should work. So let's see if it does. We'll go into our application, and it's API search. And then I believe the property we're looking for is term. So what do you think, Nick? Any recommendations on what we should search for?
Studio apartment? I don't know.
Let's say
this
studio.
Is Airbnb style, right? I've never used Airbnb, so I wouldn't even know what I'm looking for.
So let's search for studio. Oh no, our app crashed. And why did it crash? The first argument. Aggregate. Well, maybe I spelled something wrong. Let me copy and paste. Here, everything else looks the same. Let's retry that. We'll have to restart the application. Studio. Internal server error. Okay. Term is not defined. Oh, because we want requests query term. Boom. So now if we look at the description, we have Honu Studio. And actually, here's another option for us to use another operator, which is the project. And I think here we could do, is it project or projection within the aggregation pipeline?
Sorry, I was answering questions in the chat. It should be, I think it's project. There's an alternative one too that you could use.
So we could do, what did we say? Description and amenities. So we'll say description 1, amenities 1. And what the 1 means is we do want this data back. We do want only this data to be sent back with our results. So let's see if this project stage is right as well. Yeah. So, and then I think it's amenities spelled differently, or Or it could be that some items don't have the amenities field, and that's why we're not seeing them. But yeah, so we searched for studio, and we're getting all of the descriptions that have the keyword studio in them. And we could also search for other things like, let's say Vegas, for example. That's where I'm from. Looks like there's only one property that mentions Vegas, and that's this one. So now we have search functionality built into our application, and Atlas Search, has a whole lot of different, features and functionalities. We can add fuzzy search in there so that if you spell things wrong, I don't know if I could show an example of that, but if we look at MongoDB, mongodb.com, and take a look at its full native cloud search, we can implement autocomplete, which is another really cool feature, type tolerance, fuzzy search, custom scoring. So, you might want some things to have more weight than others, filters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I always love showing off search because it's so easy to implement, so quick. And so I think in the last hour and 10 minutes, we did a lot. We built an application, we connected it to the database, we got data from the database, wrote to it, added a search index, added search capabilities. I think we did a lot. What do you think, Nick?
I do think we accomplished a lot, and I love that we had so much engagement in our chat. It looks like there's a lot of interest in Next.js, and it might be even more interest in just React.js in general. So it's topics that we may want to explore further on the streams.
Yeah, and we do have our MongoDB Developer Hub where we do write a lot of content around React, around Next.js, around just kind of up and coming technologies. Nick writes a lot about game development. So if you're interested in game development, he has a whole bunch of blog posts, whether it's working with Unity or Phaser. How to use Mongoose, how to build mobile applications. I think I saw in the comments somebody was asking about React Native. I don't know if we have a lot of content around that, but good feedback for us to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let
me just switch it over to just our faces rather than your screen, and I think we'll just bring it to a close, right, Otto?
Sounds good. I was just pulling up the AMA as well with Mark Porter.
Oh yeah, let me go back to your screen.
Show that.
Yeah, there is an AMA happening with our CTO, Mark Porter. If you want to ask some questions, I definitely encourage it. Otto is bringing it up. I pasted it numerous times in the chat. From a logistical perspective here, we were trying something new today. So we were streaming to both Twitch and YouTube in parallel. So I see that there was a lot of people on YouTube and Twitch tuning in. That's fantastic. You have options. We haven't decided if we're going to do both or stick to one yet, but we're just playing around. If you are using MongoDB, it sounds like a lot of you are using MongoDB. If you're interested in joining us on a stream to kind of demonstrate what you're working on and kind of take advantage of our audience, reach out to us. Go to the community.mongodb.com. Say, hey, big fan of the streams, want to be a part of it, and we'll see what we can do to get you on, because we definitely like to have guests.
Definitely.
What do you think, Otto?
Yeah, I love it. I love talking to developers. I love seeing what people build. Are you working with Next.js? Are you working with MongoDB, Gatsby, Strapi? Whatever technology you're interested in, let us know, and let us know what you're doing with it. We would love to connect with you. And let us know what type of content you'd like to learn more about. I mean, we work in developer relations. We're only successful if we can teach the community and provide them value. So let us know what your pain points are, what you'd like to learn more about, and we'll create more content for it.
Anything else, Otto?
No, Nick, thank you for being an amazing host as always. Thank you for everybody that tuned in, and we will see you next time.
See you later.